In December of 2018, I returned home after visiting my family for the holidays. Twitter was rife with memes about this new Netflix movie, Bird Box. Not wanting to miss out on the hype, I decided to slouch down to watch it. To my dismay, I hated it. I thought the movie was terrible. I felt so completely betrayed by the people of Twitter.com, and I vowed never to watch a Netflix special ever again. January 2019. Netflix and Hulu released their Fyre Fest documentaries within days of each other. Now, I had been following this fiasco since the original tweets came out with pictures of those delicious island sandwiches. Twitter was rife with memes again, and there were 2 documentaries. I was so excited. So I sat down, buckled up, and I watched both of them in the same day. The documentaries teach me mostly about Billy McFarland and Ja Rule, and how off the walls they were with this festival. I don't get to learn much else about the history of Bahamian tourism, festival culture, or the deeper context behind it. There's barely even interviews with locals from the Great Exuma where the festival was to be held. Dejected once again, I vowed to never again watch another streaming documentary. That is, until January 2020, Netflix releases Killer Inside, The Mind of Aaron Hernandez. There weren't all the memes about this one, so it had to be good, or at least I thought. Then, I mostly learn about Aaron Hernandez's sexuality and how that contributed to his rage issue. Now, in all fairness, this series does a better job of delving into the wider implications than the Fyre Fest documentaries did, but it still ultimately feels like just a character study on Aaron Hernandez. And so, after that, again, I said, no more streaming specials for this boy. Okay, I lied. It's April 2020 now, just a couple months after watching the last one. The memes, the pop culture presence, just everything in general. I guess I'll have to watch Tiger King. Okay, fine, I'll watch Tiger King. Okay, I checked up on Animal Crossing. My town's doing great. We're good now. I'm calm. But I'm not trying to say that any of these pieces of media are bad or that you should feel bad for enjoying them. I mean, I enjoyed them. Otherwise, I would have turned them off halfway through. Except for Bird Box. Oh my god, I could not stand that. Okay, I only included Bird Box due to the hype, but what I'm trying to get at is that I've noticed a pretty disturbing trend recently with all of these documentaries that gain a lot of hype on social media platforms and beyond. In my opinion, the potential for a documentary to dig deeper on the further reaching implications of something becomes lost in these projects. Or rather, I think the execution is misguided with them. These documentaries have excellent camera work, editing, and pacing, but that's not all you need to make a meaningful documentary. Now, I've mentioned all of these pieces of media, but this video is specifically titled The Problem with Tiger King because, in my opinion, this one is the most egregious example of what I'm talking about. So, let's keep it moving then. Also, if you haven't seen Tiger King, tread lightly from this point forward, because I'm gonna be spoiling pretty much the whole plot and everything, okay? Yeah, bye. So this part is just a quick refresher on what Tiger King is all about, and I'm gonna try and keep it as short and sweet as possible, so let's just go right into it. Tiger King, Murder, Mayhem, and Madness is a true crime documentary miniseries released on Netflix in March 2020. It clocks in at 7 45-minute long episodes with one bonus after show episode too. The focus of the documentary is on this dude, who is referred to as Joe Exotic.
Come down and have a beer with us. Smoke a cigarette if you need to. I'm Joe Exotic, and we'll make sure that you have a good time.
He owned and ran a private exotic animal park, GW Zoo, in Wynwood, Oklahoma. He mainly shows off his exotic tigers there, but he's got plenty of other animals as well. There's also a network of other big cat collectors featured in the doc, who we'll talk about later. Joe Exotic is eccentric, flippant, and shows little regard to most other people. His zoo attracts many visitors and becomes a good source of income for him. He even runs a wild reality show of sorts out of it called Joe Exotic TV, which serves to fuel his rampant narcissism. Joe is also revealed to be a homosexual, and the partners that the show mainly focuses on are two of his husbands named John and Travis. Uh-oh. In comes Carole Baskin. She runs Big Cat Rescue, a sanctuary in Tampa, Florida. She touts herself as an animal rights activist, so you can see where her and Joe Exotic might beef a little. Now, things get dicey as their feud escalates, and Joe antagonizes her and talks about wanting her dead.
That is how sick and tired of this shit I am.
He, hates her.
I consider that bitch to be one of the biggest terrorists in the exotic animal world right now.
To make matters worse, Carole's husband, Don Lewis, mysteriously disappears. There's little evidence, not even a body, so Joe Exotic and his team of compatriots are convinced that Carole Baskin killed her husband and fed him to the tigers at her sanctuary.
So the whole world's wondering, would you actually grind your husband up, feed him to the tigers so there's no evidence?
The battle continues, and due to the feud, Joe Exotic loses a lot of money, and his mind. He hands over control of his zoo to this guy from Vegas named Jeff Lowe, and this other guy, James Garretson. Things get pretty out of hand, and Joe hires a hitman to try and kill Carole Baskin. James Garretson becomes a federal informant against Joe. Bing bang boom, Joe Exotic is in prison for murder for hire and animal rights charges. You can imagine that this whole story unravels rather quickly. Now here we get into the fatal flaw of this series. We have all of these really interesting and eccentric characters, but how much further than that does this all really go? There's many different ways to do documentaries. You can have it be all interviews, you can have it be all narration, you can have it all caught on camera, or you can have some kind of blending of those three. Choose your own adventure. A lot of these built for streaming documentaries are primarily based upon interviews. In this case, it's important to have strong characters that the audience can connect with or take an interest in, so that they can follow the plot and messages of the documentary. Phew. All right, Documentary 101, you are dismissed. No homework this weekend. I will see you next Monday. I almost tripped over the ring light. Now, as you already know, the characters in Tiger King are quite the strong personalities.
Your Big Daddy cigar, looky there. Oh, that's getting the phone to ringing. Yeah.
Now, this is a good thing, to a point. I started having an issue with it around episode 2. There was just this extreme fixation on making the characters' uniqueness really shine, but this kind of starts to paint them more as folk heroes than anything else. The documentary begins to play up their eccentricities so much to the point that they don't even feel that much like people anymore. The Fyre Fest documentaries do the same thing with Billy McFarland and Ja Rule. They almost become these otherworldly cartoon characters for us to gawk at from afar. I'm not claiming that Joe Exotic is a boring, run-of-the-mill kind of dude, but the first 2 episodes tried desperately hard to make him look as wild and outlandish as possible.
Dynamite.
This makes the story feel more and more like fiction and makes it more difficult to tie it into real-world sensibilities and consequences. That's how we end up with all these memes calling for freeing Joe Exotic, even though he proved time and time again to be the most morally bankrupt person in the whole series. In fact, he's become idolized and immortalized online because the producers worked towards making him a meme instead of a person. Tiger King also introduces us to a few other big cat zoo owners, but the main 2 that I want to focus on right now are Doc Antle and Mario Tabraue. Doc Antle is shown to be a special brand of holistic hippie nonsense. He basically has a harem of young women running his zoo who lives there. He also has sex with them under the guise of enlightening them.
How many wives does Doc Antle have?
I don't fucking care.
Then we have Mario Tabraue, a man who was sentenced to 100 years in prison for racketeering charges. He was essentially a drug kingpin akin to Tony Montana, and he had all the violent tendencies to go along with that. He claims that his crime habit was to fund his big cat zoo habit. You know, I'm starting to think that I might have gotten into the wrong career field. In the first 2 episodes, Tiger King spends less runtime on Doc Antle and Mario Tabraue combined than it does on Joe Exotic alone. Joe is the main character, however, much of this feels as though it's to establish him as the most absurd and interesting character. Where I felt that Mario and Doc Antle were just as outrageous as him despite having less screen time. By virtue of naturally letting me come to that conclusion, they felt more like human characters to me than Joe Exotic. We're only 2 episodes into a 7-episode series, and Joe Exotic already feels like nothing more than a spectacle to the audience. At this point, he's just a meme, and everything he does from this point forward is meme-worthy. He already felt like a meme, there's no need to force it. We could have spent all this screen time exploring the big cat trade as a whole, but instead we're learning all about Joe Exotic and Carole Baskin's many wild and wacky quirks. While I was watching this, I thought to myself it seems to come from such a high plane of privilege to be able to focus this much energy on these people's personal lives, rather than the larger implications of the big cat trade. Tiger King does visit these topics periodically, but it always shifts attention right back to the characters after barely scratching the surface.
You're open to the public. You're doing bone tours, night tours, day tours, kid camps, weddings, you name it. If you're not fucking exploiting the animals at that point, what the hell are you doing?
In my opinion, Carole Baskin was as bad as Joe. They were both, taking advantage of exotic animals to make money. So to me, it was just a feud.
As soon as we start to explore the differences in animal exploitation between Joe and Carole, they're labeled as the same, it's boiled down to just a feud, and then it's back to Joe versus Carole again. Very cool. This fixation on characters and personalities leads to a lot of arguments and evidence in this series that pretty much just amount to hearsay, which we'll get a little bit more into detail on that later on in the video. And we're also going to get to the whole Carole Baskins killed her husband thing. Okay, I promise.
We get there when we get there.
What we have here is an effective character study. The audience gets to learn all about these people and personalities on screen. However, it still falls flat with this a few times. Saf Safari, a manager on Joe Exotic's zoo, is consistently dead-named and misgendered throughout the course of the show. Saf has since spoken in an interview that he doesn't take this sort of thing to heart. But you would think that a show that had so much of a focus on the details about the characters would have gotten this thing right. Another point when Tiger King fails in this character study is with one of Joe's young husbands, Travis. Throughout the course of the documentary, we don't learn too much about him. That is, until episode 5, when it's revealed that Travis died due to a presumably self-inflicted gunshot wound. Now the documentary decides to develop him as a character. But come on, buddy, it's episode 5 out of 7, and he's been there the whole time. Waiting until his death to delve into his personal life and relationship with Joe makes it feel like he only exists in this documentary to make Joe look more sick and twisted. That to me just seems like an injustice to Travis at the hands of this documentary. He's a human being who died a tragic death, and he was used as a prop. Much like how Joe used Travis's mother as a prop in his following marriage.
2 months after my son died, he married Dylan. Invited me to the wedding. Okay, I thought it was gonna be a wedding, No, it was the cameraman, me, and the flower girl. So on the social media, Travis's mom's fine with it, so everybody else should be. Then I didn't hear anything from him again.
It feels like Tiger King is mainly thorough when it serves to make Joe Exotic look as deranged as possible. It's due to this approach that many times Tiger King is telling me exactly how I should feel about these people and these events, rather than just showing me and letting me figure it out for myself. What makes this especially frustrating is that there's a scene that demonstrates that this documentary has the potential to show things objectively instead of telling the audience how to feel. At the beginning of this scene, Joe learns that a tiger bit Saf's arm, and the situation is pretty serious. Joe Exotic goes to handle it, and check out how he reacts.
You all right?
Stay with me. Stay with me. Ladies and gentlemen, before you hear it on the news, I'm going to tell you myself. About an hour ago, we had an incident where one of the employees stuck their arm through the cage and a tiger tore her arm off. I can give you your money back, or I can give you a rain check. Why don't you come back at another date? Oh my God. I am never going to financially recover from this.
This is brilliant. I get to see exactly how Joe Exotic reacts to human suffering that happens directly in front of him. And this 30-second clip shows me infinitely more than a 45-minute episode that's just full of interviews. They didn't have to do anything other than just show me this clip, and I already feel like a super genius. Average audiences are smart, way smarter than a lot of filmmakers give them credit for. If you let the audience figure these things out in their own smart brains, it'll be a much better viewing experience for everyone. However, these kinds of moments are sparse in Tiger King. Later on in the show, the crew attempts to go inside Mario Tabrawe's big cat compound to gather some footage. The build-up to this has Carol Baskin explaining to us how heavily armed and guarded Mario's property is. Just watch.
I don't know of anyone who has ever been able to infiltrate Mario Tabrawe's facilities.
Oh shit, what is this? Hey!
Good morning, how you doing, sir? Do you have any reservation for today?
I don't.
You don't? Well, unfortunately, I can't let you go because it's a private place.
I've been trying to call and they, you know, we want...
This is a private property. You actually have to have permission, sir.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you, have a great day.
So the guard just politely tells them that they need a reservation to get in. It even like zooms in on his pistol and presents it like, this man's dangerous. He's got a golf cart mall cop with nothing to lose. They end up getting in and having an interview with Mario later, so honestly, I'm not even sure what this whole scene was about in the first place. Maybe this scene is attempting to present Carol as an unreliable narrator, but it's hard to tell. I've watched this scene over and over again, and honestly, all it does is just make me laugh. As an audience member, I don't feel like I got to decide how I felt about the characters in an organic way. It's like I'm bound by law to think about them the same way the directors do. By this logic, it certainly seems like the directors want you to think that Carol Baskin killed her husband! All right, fine. I really didn't want to make a whole chapter on this part, but honestly, I don't really have a choice, given all of the memes and everything, so here we go. All right, so the primary focus of episode 3 is the disappearance of Carol Baskin's ex-husband, Don Lewis. Before you eviscerate my comment section, I'm not ruling out the possibility that she killed Don Lewis. However, there's effectively no evidence against Carol in the disappearance. Don Lewis's body has never been recovered, and the circumstances surrounding the case are quite murky. The county sheriff's office found no evidence of foul play on Carol's property. Lewis's van was found at a regional airport where he owned a few small aircraft and would fly his planes despite having a suspended pilot's license. No evidence was recovered from the van either. Police conducted a 5-day investigation in Costa Rica where Lewis owned property and was known to fly to. The investigation still hasn't come up with any evidence that explicitly points to murder. Does this absolve Carol Baskin of the case? Well, not entirely, but we still don't have that much to go off of. Carol refused to take a polygraph test per the advice of her lawyer, and was also involved in a legal dispute with Don Lewis's children over the inheritance. A suspicious clause added to the will that says in the case of disappearance that his estate goes to Carol is about the only damning piece of evidence against her. So anyway, our body of evidence against Carol Baskin is questionable at best, but yet Tiger King spends basically an entire episode full of interviews accusing her of killing Don Lewis. Since this is the case, so much of the interviews in episode 3 revolve around things like hearsay and speculation, which makes this episode particularly arduous to watch.
He was afraid of her. We didn't know exactly why.
Carol's brother was a member of the sheriff's department, and I think he maintained some sort of, well, you know, that's my sister. I want you to tread lightly, and I don't know that happened, but I'm sure he wouldn't just stand there and do nothing.
So what's the theory that makes the most sense?
Well, there's no proof. I feel the one that would benefit the most from something happening to my father is Carol.
She knows.
What? At this point, they're not even letting the audience speculate themselves anymore. It would be way more interesting if we were just left to wonder what happened, but instead the show already manufactured the memes going, "Carol Baskin killed her husband," for us. Finally, the loudest voice making this claim is Joe Exotic himself, who's been painted as flippant and unreliable this entire time. Now he's on the side of truth and justice? Hilariously enough, there's little to no mention of Don Lewis's disappearance for the remainder of the series, aside from a soundbite here or there where Joe Exotic says, "Carol Baskin killed her husband." This is likely going to be the most opinion-based part of this video, so if you're gonna flame me for anything, I guess make it be for this. Aside from a few choice sections here and there, we don't get to explore a whole lot of the motivations for the plot points outside of Don Lewis's disappearance and the murder hit against Carol Baskin. There are no interviews with animal specialists outside of Carol, Joe Exotic, and the rest of the exotic animal owners. The only professionals on the show are law enforcement and prosecutors. Learning why the exotic animal trade is so large in the United States could have unraveled so much of the mystique behind these characters and their motivations. Instead of this, we are force-fed every single detail about Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin's feud. We get to extrapolate on every vague piece of evidence on Don Lewis's disappearance, but we barely get to learn about the animals or the workers who are taken advantage of by private zoo owners. The tigers themselves become a backdrop to Joe and Carol's feud. In my opinion, after the first couple episodes, you could have replaced the tigers with bicycles, and you still would have ended up with the same show. Tiger King seems to lose all awareness later in the series when it decides to conveniently take a hard-hitting animal rights perspective in the last episode. After hardly covering the tigers for the last few episodes, the audience is subjected to a 15-minute montage of the many ways the animals were abused and neglected by Joe, Carol, and the others throughout the whole ordeal. In a moment of supreme irony, we get this soundbite in the last 10 minutes of the final episode.
What started out as this feud between two people, good and noble fight to stop cub selling, cub petting, turned into a personal and legal court battle. And it just became about them. You mean like how this whole entire show became all about them? I spent this entire series learning about Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin. What the f***? What I'm about to show you is the last bit of dialogue in the whole entire show.
Did I do it on purpose? No, I was wrapped up in having a zoo.
Joe Exotic, everybody. Woohoo! Much like the previous soundbite I showed you, this acts like an allegory for the whole show. The creators of Tiger King were way more wrapped up in the zoo that was Joe and Carol's feud to focus on the real issues behind the crimes that were committed. This series has a runtime of just under 5.5 hours, plus the bonus episode. There was so much fluff in the first few episodes that could have been cut out in favor of more research on the exotic animal trade and the exploitation of labor.
And that's Carol Baskin down at Big Cat Rescue. It was all part of Carol Baskin's plan with Peter, the Carol Baskin. Carol Baskin is so influential.
And there still would have been enough time to show all the gritty details of the murder for hire against Carol Baskin. Honestly, the strongest parts of the show are in the latter half when they're cracking open the legal case against Joe Exotic. That's why that's not featured a whole lot in this video. I'm not saying that this documentary had to be either all a true crime series or all an animal rights series and no in between. I'm saying it easily could have been both and been able to make a statement about animal rights, like the Blackfish it was advertised to be. The bonus 8th episode even presents itself as a rare opportunity to rectify a lot of these problems. But instead, we just get this half-baked talk show with Joe McHale and a lot of the people that were in the original show. Like, are you serious? So here we are. I finished Tiger King and I'm disappointed. Not because I thought it was bad. Rather, I'm disappointed because I'm tired of seeing the same cliche pop up in yet another true crime documentary that got a lot of mainstream attention. They release these pieces of media with very high production values. The Netflix and Hulu Firefest documentaries, The Mind of Aaron Hernandez, and Tiger King all look and sound amazing. They're paced well and they all have compelling storylines. If this wasn't the case for Tiger King, I wouldn't have binged all the episodes all at once like I did. The issue lies within its hesitance to dive deeper into these stories. Both of the Firefest documentaries could have explored the exploitation of the Bahamas more and given the people who live there much more screen time, instead of giving Billy McFarland and Ja Rule even more fame and attention. The Mind of Aaron Hernandez could have interviewed more victims of domestic violence at the hands of professional athletes and explored male aggression in the United States as a whole, instead of dissecting Aaron Hernandez until he was boiled down to his CTE and sexuality. Tiger King could have focused more on the exotic animal trade and workers' rights issues instead of, well, you get the point. This fixation on the criminals and personalities behind the crimes make it feel more like reality television than anything else. It makes it easier for the audience to separate from the real world consequences of these issues. Maybe that's why we enjoy these works of media so much in the first place. It weighs on my conscience much less to watch Tiger King than it does to watch Blackfish or 13th. There's nothing wrong with that lack of guilt, and there's nothing inherently wrong with shows like Tiger King catapulting themselves into being household names. I'm always happy when a documentary gets widely appreciated, but it doesn't sit well with me that this is becoming the formula for documentaries to reach mainstream hype. Documentary is one of the greatest art forms to inform and inspire critical thinking. When you strip that from the genre, then what are we left with? Carol Baskin memes! Hey everyone, it's brissdali here. First off, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who made it to this point in the video. This was my first time making something this long for YouTube, so if it gets a decent response, I might put together a more informal part 2 on it. There was some information or some opinions that I had that didn't necessarily fit into this video that I would still love to discuss with everyone. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you thought about this video or about Tiger King or anything else beyond that. Everyone, stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again.